Hello, Happy New Year, Happy Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, or greetings to whatever kind of holiday or how you treat this holiday period. I wish you good health. Welcome back to Desktop Grenadier. It's been a while since put out any content. Not been the best of the year. I won't go into too much detail. However, I'm back, fighting fit and producing content again. So I must be in a good place, and I've got the time to do it. A couple of life changes here and there. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger, and all that. And I'm back managing to do my hobby. Before we move on and before we get into anything, I just need to give a couple of shout outs to a couple of people that have have made this year bearable, especially on the gaming front. Big shout out to Mark Trowbridge, first of all. You deserve a Marshall's baton, sir. You have been in all contact throughout the year, and you've helped keep the page ticking over and producing content as well back in the summer. And I salute you, sir. Thank you very much. Rich Hamilton has also been in touch throughout the year, and he's actually sort of made, in a roundabout way, well, he has. I couldn't do this exact video without him. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to you and all your team, and thank you for everything you do. Paul Bowman, very good friend, been playing with him for years, and thank you for the copious amounts of dialogue that we've kept going with throughout the year, or throughout the years, to be honest, but this year in particular. We'll get into more what Paul's doing in our little collective in a second. My good friend in New Zealand, you know who you are, for your constant witty banter. You're hilarious. Ha ha ha. Brian Twist, and basically anybody else that's been in contact, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Now, this is not going to be our big campaign. We have a third attempt at the 100 Days campaign going on. I'm not going to film it just because it's a huge undertaking. Those that follow the channel might have seen the previous two, when I was the French and Prussians, and try to put so much historical flavour onto it. It's a huge undertaking. But this one's a little bit different, and we will sort of talk about it as and when it comes out, or after the fact. Because Paul, who I mentioned earlier, has done a huge months and months of research into the actual starting positions of each unit, the numbers, strengths, locations, or every single unit on that big 100 Days map, the 350 odd turn one. And we're playtesting it at the moment. And we're playtesting it using our rules, again, those that follow the channel. And they've come on quite a bit since possibly my last video. What we're doing, we've got rules for house rules that we've developed over the years, not just our little collective. There's been input from a lot of people, and we've got a courier system. The courier system is fully working, and these house rules cover, well, there you go, they cover sort of command and control, movement, stacking, combat, and they apply to a small skirmisher game as much as they do to sort of these large one map campaign games as well. We're playtesting it, fine-tuning it, and then if there's any interest, then we will put it out to the group as a PDF, and you can all debate it and throw it in the bin or whatever you want to do with it. We also have a working courier system. Those that have, again, followed the channel before, like and subscribe and all this, that, the other. Yeah, it's fully working, and we're playtesting that again, final little changes if we need them, and then if there's interest, we can sort of release that into the group as well. Right, as I said, Rich Hamilton has made this sort of video possible, and we're going to do a playthrough of Napoleon's Russian campaign. Now that's going to be the next game that has the artistic updates by the wonderful artist Mitchell Nolte, who's done fantastic work. And I guess as a little Christmas present, or Rich gave me sort of early access to the files and everything like that. So I'm going to showcase that, and if we have a look there, he has released previews onto the various pages and stuff like that. But I just want to take a minute and say thank you very much, Rich, and thank you very much, Mitchell, and Nick as well, the graphics coordinator over at WDS. They look fantastic. They are, I mean, the old ones, if we have a look, they weren't bad. They were functional. Yep, we knew that was horse artillery or whatever troop it was. However, you brought it on leaps and bounds, and they look absolutely fantastic, in my opinion. Well done. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Now, this video, it's going to be a playthrough, but what I've noticed is that over the various weeks, especially sort of during the sale and even in the summer sale, you get a lot of people come over to Napoleonics from ACW titles, from 7 Year War and what have you, and it plays very differently. I've played 7 Year War, and I've played American Civil War games, and I'm no expert in them. pretty much play Napoleonics exclusively, to be honest. However, it's very different, and this is designed as a very simplistic entry into Napoleonics. Kind of a tutorial in a sense, but I'm not going to go through each button, each setting, each rule, what that does. We'll talk about it naturally as the video sort of progresses. However, it's not going to be an in-depth tutorial. The ones I did before, most of them still will, for the most part, still hold true. So if you need to, and you're really unsure literally about every little button and movement and all this, like the other, in a more sort of detailed case-by-case basis, I've got a couple of videos that I did. They'll still hold true for the most part. I would suggest reading the PDT changes, PDT and updates, version updates, to see what's different since I did those videos, and they were, I can't remember if it was update 4 or just before update 4. However, with the documentation with those videos, it should see you right. This is kind of a very basic entry video into Napoleonic warfare. Have a look at units, have a look at very generalistic different types of unit, how the game breaks them down more, dispel a few myths, answer a few questions that I keep seeing coming up. How do you use cavalry? What the hell do I do with skirmishers and things like that? So as we go on a nice general playthrough through the Battle of Krasni, we will just have a chat about general things, but it's not going to be an in-depth tutorial. But I will give you some hints and tips as we go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play out the Battle of Krasni, and it's one of the getting started scenarios. Now, I can't recommend enough. If you're new into these games, you bought a title on a whim in the sale, and you think, oh yeah, I might try that. I can't recommend enough trying out the getting started scenario. A, because it's manageable. B, it's normally a fun scenario where it's not outweigh, one side isn't bigger than the other or not too big. The AI is normally quite good, and it gives you a nice challenge. However, the other thing is that amongst the myriad of fantastic documentation that you actually get, you will get a handheld guide that will hold your hand through pretty much every button in the PDFs, in the manuals in your install folder. And it goes along turn by turn with what you need to do, what the units are, facings, formations, all of that sort of stuff. So that is a real good foundation. I like to print them off, but if they're in PDF, then you can put it on a tablet, you can put it on your computer if you want. If you've got two screens, you can put it on one screen, play on the other screen, etc., etc. That's my first bit of advice, really, is to play the getting started scenario. Now, if you've got a couple of titles, you might not need to. However, if it's your first one and you're still unsure, start at the bottom and work your way up. That's what I recommend with these games. Don't go straight into the Battle of Waterloo, Borodino, Wagram. Don't go straight into them because you're going to be overwhelmed. Okay? There is a bit of a learning curve with these games. But the good news is, once you crack it, you can play any of the titles. The Napoleonic titles. Even the library in general of all their games you could probably have a crack at, because you've got the basics, you know, the toolbar, pretty much where everything is, how it operates. And then, of course, each game has its own sort of ins and outs of and variations of movement and attacking, all this, that, the other, based upon when it is. So, Battle of Krasni then. What we're looking at then is Napoleon's vanguard with Marshal Murat. He is heading towards Moscow, or he's heading east, trying to catch the Russians. And the vanguard come across a Russian, I suppose rear guard you could call it, at the small town of Krasni on the way to Smolensk. And if we have a look at a map, that's where we are, Europe. Now you can see there why it's pretty miserable outside. And we're going here, and there's Smolensk there, and we're at a little town called Krasni. It says about Spurbank there. However, that is definitely Krasni. So, what have we got then? 18-turn scenario, and we've basically got to push the Russians out as quick as possible. No problem, he says. I'm going to take the French. I'm going to put the Russians on automatic. I'm going to give them a little bit of an advantage. And the rules, I'm not going to talk about each optional rule. I'm going to do that in actually a separate video, what each one means, what the pros and cons are, in my opinion. There's a couple of omissions there. You might think, why on earth is he playing with that? Or why on earth is he not playing with that? In our little collective, and I generally only play a couple of people, we have discussed these to death, if I'm honest, and why it's good, why it's bad. We've tested each one and what it does, etc. And what we found is that this is quite a nice compromise for what we're trying to achieve. For example, no detached melee. Fantastic rule in principle, but it doesn't quite work for us when we're using sort of large campaigns and scouting, for example. Column movement restriction, that's a fantastic last edition. Line movement restriction, they're not 7 years water. I could talk about these and I'm not going to. So I'm going to leave them as is. Any questions, put them in the comment, and there will be a separate video for these coming up. So there we go. Now, your game probably doesn't quite look like the version I've got. I assure you, it's the same version that you have. However, what I wanted to just point out is that these games are fairly straightforward to edit in terms of the map, and this is a Ferrari's map mod. I'm not saying anything's wrong with the original, I just prefer the historical flavour that this map actually adds as we go. The other thing is the actual maps themselves. There we go, it does look quite nice. The actual maps themselves, these are the 3D hand-drawn maps that these, not all titles have, but Russia certainly does, thank goodness. I just wanted to say how easy it is to actually change it. If you open up, which is essentially a picture file, photo, you go into Windows Photo Editor, so that's already going to be on your computer if you've got Windows, and then you can start putting all these filters on, and this, that, the other, and if you want to go in black and white, go in black and white. You save it, or maybe make a copy of the original and then save it, and then just rename this one. You can play about and do whatever you want. That's why my map, no, I don't want to save that I'm using, I have changed the filter a little bit, and it looks a little bit more period appropriate. I don't know if that's the correct terminology or anything, but that's all I've done there. Just adjusted the colours. I put what I did with the vintage filter, adjusted the colours a little bit, and I just prefer the aesthetics of it. But I just wanted to show how easy it actually is. In terms of other bits, those that follow me for a while, I did a counter mod for the Napoleonic Title. It was a few years back now. And then, of course, they updated it with more counters, which is fantastic. However, my counter mod just was null and void then. And I've only just recently, because a few people have asked, and I've seen it on the forums and things like that, can it be done and everything? This is just a personal thing. I've got no affiliation with WDS. It's purely me just sat with paint, pixel by pixel, just messing around, really. And it gives you another option if you want. But again, if you really wanted to edit things, then if you've got Microsoft Paint, you can go into Microsoft Paint and mess around and play around and do whatever you want to do. It is painstaking work. That's the bit that takes a bit of time. But the actual getting the images on it, it's literally Microsoft Paint. Or I dare say they use better programs than me, but I'm a simpleton and I have to use the simple programs. So Microsoft Paint will allow you to play about. Just make sure you save everything. And there's a lot of doing a bit, loading it up, having a look, changing it, and it does take a little bit of time. Literally pixel by pixel work. So that's my counter mod. That's I've got. I've got the Ferrari's map mod. I've changed slightly. I was going to keep this vanilla to showcase it, and then I thought, well, no, actually, but people want to change things and they complain about this, that, and the other. Well, you can if you want to, and you're a bit savvy. Do it yourself. Of course, the new units are all on there, and that's fine. I'm not going to touch them. Now, as I go, as I mentioned, I'm going to. Have a look at sort of how I play, give you some hints and tips and things like that. Some people might find it boring, other people might get something out of it, and I'll timestamp the video, so at the bottom you can skip ahead to these bits that might be bread and butter to some people, but might be new for other people. Now, when it comes to a battle, maybe not the smaller ones, one of the things I would recommend is just doing a little bit of research for context. Why am I on this field? Why are those troops there? What happened to the lead up? What's involved in this battle? What are the implications of a defeat? What are the implications of a victory? Etc. etc. So you don't have to go out and buy the myriad of books that are out there, and there are a huge amount of books, and that's a whole other subject rather than just a video on its own. You can have a look at the maps, there's a lot around. You can have a look at orders of battle and get a bit more in depth with it. And it just helps you build up a picture. I'm not talking days and months of research here. I'm just talking even, oh no, I don't want to say it. Not Wikipedia, I'll show you in a second the ones I recommend. But even Wikipedia if you have to. Just a 5, 10, 15-minute read. Watch a documentary on YouTube or whatever. The Epic History guys are fantastic, for example. And just give a little bit of context, because that's going to add a little bit of flavour. You're going to get more invested in what's on the field and your troops and your leaders, and rather than just there's some units, let's throw them about. So you don't have to do this, but I just think it adds to a little bit. So it builds up the picture of what's actually going on. Now, in terms of references, apart from books, which, there's a huge myriad, there are some fantastic online sources, but as with any online source, you get good and you get bad. One of the best out there is Napoleon.com, and there's a Russian sort of equivalent, Napoleonic, but I'm not even going to try and pronounce it, but sometimes when you search for something, that comes up as well. It's equally as good. Napoleon.com is comprehensive. It covers so much stuff. Units, tactics of each army, battles, a little bit about the politics, the background. It's an absolutely fantastic online reference. It doesn't go into huge amounts of detail, so it is lightweight, but it's concise, and that's what I like. It doesn't waffle, it doesn't drivel. It's quite easy to find the things you're looking for. NapoleonSeries.org is another fantastic one on the same sort of note. They have access to the Nafziger Order of Battles, for example, and you can pretty much go through the whole of the Napoleonic Wars and have a look at a tiny little skirmish, and that Order of Battle is probably on there. So do a little bit of context, have a bit of a read and see what's what. So as we said then, we're on the way to Moscow, and we have under our disposal the vanguard of the French army, which is going to be under Marshal Murat. There is as a wing commander. Ney and his third corps are here, as well as a lot, well, not all the cavalry, but a lot of cavalry. We've got Grouchy with his third reserve, we've got Montbrun with his second reserve, and then somewhere back here we've also got Nansouci with his first reserve. So another tip is to have a look at your leaders and see what leaders you have on the field and pros and cons. And again, if you sort of read into the context of the battle and stuff like that, you can start to put stories and names to, or faces to names that you've read, etc. So I like to build up a bit of a picture. It might not mean, if you picked up the title, they might not mean anything to you. However, you see Marshal Ney, pretty much famous across any wargamer, bravest of the brave and all this, that, the other. But he comes in various guises throughout the war. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're bad, sometimes they're going to have different ratings, for example. And I'll let this slip because I don't think it's a bad one. They're looking into changing PDTs and looking into, this is sort of Easter time, let's say, and looking at actually changing leader ratings for each battle. So if you've got Ney in 1813, you've got him in 1812, you've got him in 1815, he's going to have a different rating, even within the same campaign perhaps, for how he was on the day. So I think that's a nice little touch. It's showing a nice little bit of detail. It's not a generic Ney, let's say, that rhymes. Then you're going to have the ability to have your leader as Napoleon, for example, at Borodino. I wonder what his rating is going to be as opposed to something like his 1814 campaign. Next thing I do then is, when I'm on a battle, is just have a look at the topography, where I am, what units I've got, and do a little bit of planning. Again, I don't just want to move stacks for the sake of moving stacks. I have to do a little bit of sort of pre-planning, find out what I'm trying to do, why I'm trying to do it, and what's the old adage? Piss poor, or proper planning prevents piss poor performance. That's the one. When I'm looking at a large scale map and instead of a campaign and I've got to march to battle and things like that, I've got to have a look at what towns and villages. Do I have to go through them? Can I bypass them? What are my marching routes? I can't have everybody on the same road, but they all need to come together more or less in the same place at the same time. Have a look at any choke points. I don't want everybody coming to the same junction at the same time. We need to marshal our armies. Have a look at the order of march. I want the right troops arriving at the right time in the order of march. I don't want all my guns at the back, for example, or my light troops at the back and my supply up front. Makes no sense. Have a look at staging areas. So when they come off the roads, we can't just put them in unit by unit into battle. We need to actually get them into formation back into their divisions. We need to concern ourselves with our flanks. Are they secure? Cossacks in Russia, are they out there? With that in mind, what am I going to use for scouting? Who's going to be scouting? Normally light cavalry. And then the objective itself, avenues of approach. What am I actually going to go over to attack or on the attack when it comes to my objective? it might not go right, so I've got to have a look at avenues of escape. So a lot of people don't like to retreat, but sometimes, especially when you're playing sort of a link campaign and force preservation and things like that, there's no shame in it, to be honest. There's not. If you can live to fight another day on the ground of your choosing, and you can sort of strengthen your forces, and then it might be for the greater good. A lot of people don't do that. Then I sort of zoom in a little bit more and have a look at the actual map itself then. Well, we've got to look at the topography, the high ground, the low ground, the rivers, the lakes and everything. Identify any sort of key terrain that might be around, that high ground above that village, for example. Any towns and villages, again, do I have to bypass them? How am I going to get to them? That would be a bit of a nightmare, that one, because it's two sides of a river, for example, with what looks like one crossing. So that's going to be a bit of a nightmare. Rivers, streams and creeks are going to be an obstacle to your troops. You can't cross them all, or if you do need to cross them, where are the bridges and fords? Don't forget as well that whilst they might be key objectives for yourself, they're probably going to be key objectives for your enemy as well. Woods and forests, they are potentially a barrier, but they can also hide a lot of things. Having a look at obstructed hexes, such as marshes and things like that, they're going to disrupt your units, they're going to slow down your units, but they can act potentially as a bit of a natural barrier. I then go in a bit further and actually have a look what I've got on the field. And I've got to think to myself, okay then, well again, where's that key terrain? What are my objectives? What am I trying to achieve? Because key terrain for me is most likely going to again be key terrain for the enemy. What are my objectives? I'm not always just going to throw troops forward and trying to destroy the enemy. Sometimes there might be clearly set victory locations, victory points, or clear objectives. Do I have to attack those redoubts, for example? Well, pretty much yes, but another scenario, there might be something that looks obvious, but do you actually have to do anything with it? Do you have to attack it? Or can you bypass it? Natural barriers to us, and natural barriers are also to the enemy, such as forests and rivers and lakes and things like that. Any strong points, how am I going to approach that strong point? That's not just, well, it shouldn't be just a headlong assault. Maybe we've got to try and get behind it, certainly try and look into getting, attacking it from the flanks, for example. Talking about my flanks, are my flanks secure? I could put my whole force in the middle and just try and punch a hole through, but then the enemy descends on you from your flank. Warfare 101. Then I've got to consider, what am I going to do with my infantry? What type of infantry do I have? Are they light? Are they heavy? I've got to consider, what am I going to do with them? Where am I going to put my skirmish line? And we'll talk about that in a second. What am I going to do with my cavalry? Are they in the right place? Is it good cavalry ground? Or like my reserve cavalry back here, do I have to get over obstacles? They're going to disrupt. They need to then sort themselves out before they're useful. Do I have my heavies in the middle, ready to take advantage of any hole that I might punch? Do I have my light cavalry to protect my flanks and sort of forage and skirmish against their light cavalry? What's my artillery? What type of artillery? Number of guns I have? How much ammunition do I have? Because you might not be able to just fire and fire and fire and fire until the end of the game. You might have to preserve your ammunition. Then I've got to think, how does all this come together then? Well, my combined arms effect, are key to winning a battle. You can't just use cavalry, not on a large scale fight anyway. You can't just use artillery, and you can't just use infantry. They all need to come together in a sort of a historical fashion, let's say, using them broadly as you should use them, but as they did in the era, and that's how you will win a battle. Proper planning and proper use of your forces will see you win the battle. What commanders have I got? What are the command ranges? Do I want to use them as, I don't want to say but within frontline hexes anyway, or do I want to just stand back a little bit and use them to lead from just behind the main line? What reserves am I going to keep? I can't throw everybody in from the beginning just in case. A, the reserves, if I have to retreat, will be there to provide cover for that retreat, and B, they could take advantage of any hole that I might create or any opportunity that I might create, and I can send in my reserves. Then I've got to think of any avenues of approach. Then I've got to think of any avenues of escape as well. That river, it's not always good to fight with something like a river or a forest or something behind your back. So generally, that's how I approach a battle. I probably go into it a lot more than other people, and you probably, to be honest, do this without realising, and maybe not in as much detail. I mean, I spent, 5 minutes explaining all that. In your head, you're probably going to do it within 30, 40, 50 seconds, or a minute or whatever. The next thing I do then is, well, I'm going to start to look at the troops that I've got, and this bit is very general. Is going to be a very general introduction into the different types, because Napoleonic Wars, I think, is one of the most diverse in terms of units, and colourful, as you could say, wars out there in terms of units and things like that. And there's a myriad of different unit types. There's a myriad of different cavalry, myriad of different artillery. But it all boils down again, as with most wars, to the bloody infantry, although they probably weren't called the bloody infantry back then. And I'll have a look. Okay, we've got Jaegers, we've got light troops. I'll have a look at what they've got. You can right click on the unit hex in the top left. It tells you everything about them, your numbers. I also have a look at my organisation, my strength. Okay, Grand Armée, that's not too bad, 20 odd thousand. And then we should have somewhere up here. We should have Third Corps. Where's Third Corps? Anyway, without going into and wasting too much time, I have a look at who's going to be coming on the map. So have we got any scheduled units? Yes, we do. We have Bruni coming with some line troops, some fresh artillery, and he's going to be here 2:45. So that is, I think, in about half an hour's time. So we do have a little bit of reserves coming. Other things I do, I'll have a look at any releases. I don't think there is any fixed units here, but you can go to releases, and that's where they would be. And fixed units are there just to sort of maintain historical accuracy. Don't particularly like them myself, but that's another debate. Or they will release if within range of a certain amount of hexes, can't quite remember, of when the enemy actually sort of appears. So you will be able to use them. They're not stuck in place for the whole battle. You will be able to use them. Now, the infantry, broadly speaking, the infantry that we have in this battle are line troops and light troops. And they more or less are the same, but they're also different at the same time. Your line troops are your backbone. They are a little bit more rigid in terms of what they can do. They can release a skirmisher company out. Light troops can, which are more agile. Sometimes they're armed with rifles. They are a bit more sort of loose formation, etc. They can break down right into companies of skirmishers across the board. Whereas line troops, they have one company of skirmishers, and that's all they can do. Now, your line troops are the backbone of your infantry. Your light troops are a little bit more sort of agile. You can use them less rigidly, let's say. Now, a line troop invariably armed with a musket. Yes, that's a brown bess on a Frenchman. Never mind, you get the picture. Remember, we're keeping it simple. Where just quantity rather than quality of fire counts. Get together, go into a line, fire enough that your muskets at your enemy so that they will disappear. Whereas light troops invariably, in their various guises, will be armed with a rifle. Yes, a Baker rifle, I know. However, your light troops will have a higher accuracy. They'll be able, if they're armed with a rifle, that is, they'll be able to fire at a greater distance with more accuracy. But in real life, and it's a bit abstracted in the game, they wouldn't be able to fire as many rounds a minute just because of the loading process, etc. So that's who we've got in this particular battle. However, when you start getting into other games and then using other nations, it becomes a little bit more complex. You've got your line troops, you've got grenadiers, you've got chasseurs, then you've got your old guard grenadiers, but you can't confuse them with the National Guard, you can't confuse them with the Middle Guard or the Young Guard or the Marine Guard. Then you've got old guard chasseur, but we also had chasseur of the line. Then we've got things like Vortigeurs, Leger, which is a colloquial term really for light troops. Then we've got flankers. Then we've got Vortigeurs and chasseurs again. We've got Vortigeurs, there we go, Marines and Pioneers. Now, as I mentioned, it can get quite complex quite quickly, but don't worry too much about it. When you start reading, what you'll realise is more or less these troops can be combined into sort of line, light, etc. There's just lots of names for what are essentially the same type of troops doing the same job. Now, that's just the French. We also have things like musketeers and fusiliers and Schutzen and Freikorps. We've got Highlanders and Grangers, militia, irregulars, Jaegers, rifles, Landwehr, lifeguards. Don't worry, again, each nation can call the same type of troop, generally speaking, just a slightly different name. Okay? So, whilst it might seem quite overwhelming at first, the game actually does quite a nice job of breaking those troops down for us. Now, you'll see all those troops here present in various guises in various games and the battles that they were supposed to be in, etc. But the game itself breaks it down into line troops, into guard troops, into light troops, into pioneers, into militia, and then there's one more type called restricted, which is basically a line troop, more or less, which cannot break off a company of skirmishers. Okay, so the game just basically breaks all of those that we've just looked at into these 5 more broad categories, which is good, and that's all we need to know at this stage. So, having a look around and seeing what we've actually got then, in terms of cavalry, we've got an awful lot, and this is one bit of a misconception or sticking point or query that people have is, well, how do I use cavalry? Which is a fair question. Broadly speaking, in the Napoleonic Wars, you had a few types of cavalry: light, or medium, and heavy. But they again break that down into lancers and dragoons, hussars, uhlans, all sorts of different names and things like that. But the game keeps it, and Cossacks, the game keeps it quite nice and simple. In terms of using them, I think this is one of the biggest misconceptions and where people don't, or they get caught with it and then they get disappointed that, oh, my cavalry didn't do this because, and they should have done, and things like that. Well, no. You've got to be a savvy commander, and cavalry can either win you or lose you a battle if you're not careful. In general, light cavalry, so hussars and lancers, chasseurs cheval and units like that, primarily are used for scouting, foraging, which is sort of a colloquial term, and skirmishing other light cavalry ahead of the main body or on the flanks of your main body of your army. Of course, you could bring them into the line, that's absolutely fine, but you would certainly not use them as a punch, as an offensive force. You could, at a local sort of place in the battle, if you needed a cavalry charge from your lights just to sort of save the day, that's absolutely fine. But generally speaking, light cavalry are not a mass offensive unit in general. Then you've got units like your heavy units, and again, a common mistake I see people sort of comment on it, or they use them as, is like a Panzer 5, that they just basically try and punch a hole. Sometimes that might work, but more often than not, the enemy is going to go into square, bring up his artillery, and you're going to massacre, for no discernible gain, all of your heavy cavalry. Now, heavy cavalry, personally, I sort of keep them more or less in reserve. I do sometimes use them as a punt, not as on mass in terms of 20,000 or 10, 15,000 cavalry in one place at one time. Sometimes an opportunity will arise where your infantry and your artillery have done their job, you've got to weaken the enemy, and you can sort of just see, oh, that's a perfect opportunity. That's the time that you need to use your heavy cavalry. Now, cavalry charges in the game take finesse, they take planning. Because it's a hex and counter game at the end of the day, you need to consider facings, you need to consider leadership, you need to consider the terrain. It's not just putting a stack of heavy cavalry against a, because you get a charge bonus, against another unit and attacking it from the side and meleeing it. No. Cavalry, take your time, be slow, be methodical, and that's how to use your cavalry, essentially. So the cavalry that we've got on the field now with Murat are chasseurs cheval, and they are light cavalry, and they are pretty much the dirty dogs of the cavalry. They're jack of all trades, they do all the horrible jobs. They will be out and about before the main body, protecting the flanks, fighting Cossacks, getting information, and yeah, they're not the most glamorous of the cavalry. However, don't underestimate them. They are a handy unit, let's say. They are a handy unit. Even being a light unit, I wouldn't use them offensively that much. However, they're certainly a worthwhile unit to have on the field. We've got some Chevaux Léger Lancers, so light Lancers of the line. Again, Lancers come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. You get Lancers of the Guard and what have you. Lancers are very good against infantry. You get a bit of a bonus against infantry. They're also good for attacking cavalry as well, believe it or not. the problem is they're sort of one hit and then get out of there. Because they're like cavalry, you go in, smash, grab, or whatever, and then get back out. We've got dragoons. Now, dragoons are a bit of a... I'm going to split them in two, dragoons. Now, a lot of books you read and things, I call them sort of a medium cavalry. They can act as light and they can act as heavies. The WDS game sort of splits that into an era. Sometimes they're heavy, sometimes they are just a sort of line cavalry, let's say. And sometimes, especially in the earlier games, you have the ability to dismount, and that's where dragoons come from. They used to be sort of cavalry that we used to dismount and be able to sort of fight on foot. So sometimes you get dragoon appeared, and sometimes you get dragoons, and sometimes, heavy dragoons, and sometimes line dragoons, and then sometimes you have the ability to dismount as well, especially in the earlier games. Now, dragoons, exactly, I would say consider them as medium. Sometimes you're going to get a bonus if they're heavy cavalry, so they are able to maintain a charge, and they can also scout and do all the jobs of a light cavalry unit. Hussars, the flamboyant pretty boys of the Napoleonic era, certainly the best uniforms in general across the board. We've got the 6th Hussars there with us. The light cavalry, they like to think they might be able to do everything the heavy cavalry do. They'll certainly tell you they're better than the heavy cavalry and things like that. However, at the end of the day, they might look fantastic, but they're still light troops. So scouting, foraging, and things like that ahead of the main body, limited offensive opportunity, I would suggest. Then we've got the big boys, things like, or units like cuirassiers and carabiniers, which are a better looking version of a cuirassier in many respects. The French had breastplates, not all nations had breastplates and things like that. They're very, very imposing. Now, heaviest horses, the heaviest men, and these are the punch that you need on the battlefield when you have, or if you create that ability to create a mass charge. Nothing can defeat them. I mean, A quality. They're usually fairly well led, and if you time it right, they can win you the battle. But you can also throw them away very easily if you're not careful. Other cavalry we've got here then, I said allies for now, because when Napoleon went into Russia, he got about 20 odd nations or something with him, something like that. And he managed to persuade the Austrians and the Prussians. Persuade the word? Yeah, anyway. He managed to bring about 20 odd nationalities with him. So we got Polish Uhlans there, which is another word for lancers, not to be confused with the lancers of the guard. We have Polish Hussars there. We've got some Prussian Uhlans, which are again Prussian lancers. And we've got a nice Württemberg, quite a rare unit, the Prince Louis Jaeger Herzog unit as well. So that's cavalry, very generalistic. Don't use them to just go on the offensive everywhere. That's not what it's about. Use your lights on your flanks and ahead of the main body, limited skirmishing with other units and things like that. Try and preserve them. And your heavies, don't use them as a panzer. Don't go in all guns blazing unless you've created that opportunity in that combined arms effect and things like that with other units. There we go. Simple, isn't it? Right, what else have we got? We've got some horse artillery. Now, artillery is the third arm. I promise that we will start fighting soon. Artillery is the third arm, and artillery, again, also comes in various guises and things like that. And we've got things like foot artillery, we've got horse artillery, we've got sort of siege guns, howitzers as well, and we've got in-place guns and things like that. And the game breaks it down quite nicely, and you get pros and cons and everything like that. And artillery can be a little bit frustrating. What you've got to remember is that they're not all one and the same. So your foot artillery comes in light and heavy. You can move it, unlimber, but you can't fire in the same turn. You have to consider the facing of your artillery. You have to consider the range of your artillery as well. Horse artillery tends to be a little bit smaller, sort of 6-pounders and things, but it's a lot more mobile and can get across the battlefield a lot quicker to support little pockets of troops and cavalry and what have you. And the benefit of horse artillery, whilst they're not as big, they can fire and move, or move and fire, on the same turn. You get howitzers, and howitzers sometimes pop up. They tend to lob shells up and over things and explode on the other side of an embankment or something like that. And they have an indirect fire capability. So, for example, you'd see a lot of howitzers are good for city bombardments and things with troops in a city getting up over the walls. And sometimes you have an indirect fire result, You think, well, they couldn't hit a barn door. That's because it's a howitzer firing, because they don't always have direct fire capability. The other type of artillery that's in the game are what they call emplaced guns, larger guns that you find a lot in sort of the Peninsular campaigns and things like that. And they are just bigger artillery pieces, sort of siege guns, 24 pounders, 32 pounders, possibly something like that. Probably can't move them, but they are devastating, particularly at close range. Right, so there we go then. Right, with all that in mind, what am I actually going to do here? Well, I'm going to have a look at the units again. So I've got a Grouchy up on my left flank, and he is with the 6th Hussars. In the centre, opposite the village, or opposite the town, we have Ney and his 3rd Corps, and we've got 1st Brigade, and they are all light troops. We've got some horse artillery, we've got some supplies, no supplies there, and a lot of cavalry. Now, one thing I will just sort of mention quickly is that I prefer here, for example, this is pretty much the full regiment almost. Well, it is within this. So I tend to break down my cavalry in fully, without exception, into squadrons. That's how they operated. They didn't just have one big regiment en masse, certainly in the hex size that we're dealing with here. So, and it gives you other opportunities. You can attack from multiple hexes and charge from multiple hexes using the same regiment. If it doesn't go right for one hex, then your whole cavalry might not blow, so you still can follow up, for example. And if you use one regiment in one stack in one hex and you haven't split them down, if they get disordered, that's it. You've got 500-600 cavalry troopers that are disordered. Whereas if you break it down, maybe half of them or whatever disorder, and it's easier to sort of rally them, if you like, and get back in the game. So in a second, I'm going to break those down into their respective squadrons. Again, we got the 8th Hussars, 5th Hussars, 9th Hussars, Chasseurs de Cheval. There's our Prince Louis. We've got some horse artillery. We've got some reserves coming up, so they are line troops, and they're under the command of Moron. Portuguese troops are coming up. Not the best, quality D. If we have a look here, 1st Brigade, 10th Division, 3rd Corps. Okay, down here is where it gets interesting, where it gets fun. I've got an awful lot of heavy cavalry. Montbrun, Lancity have a tremendous amount of cuirassiers. They have a tremendous amount of it's literally heavy cavalry. And my first sort of inclination is, well, what on earth am I going to do with all these? I need good cavalry ground. So, as I sort of mentioned in that planning bit, just having a look here then, I've got to think of key terrain. In key terrain, there isn't much down to the south. To the north, there is. Up here, I've got a little bit of ground that I can go over and fall on the Russians' right flank with that high ground here and get eyes on whatever they've got over here, because the city, the town, is actually blocking my entire line of sight to what's there. I'll also probably send scouts this way and scouts down here to make sure there are no roving Cossacks waiting to take any advantage of me slipping up. So that's what I'm going to do up here. In the centre, I don't really have much choice apart from a frontal assault. There's not much room to manoeuvre in that sense. What I will do though is set some artillery up as and when it sort of comes, just to cover the Russians' front line up here. I'm expecting them to be pretty dug in. Now, I haven't looked at the Russians in this scenario. I like to play it sort of blind. I don't like to... Some people do. They like to study both sides of a battle so they know where all your units are. That's not what I'm about. I like sandbox. Give me the units, give me the historical starting positions, and let me make my own mistakes. That's how I prefer to play. So I'm expecting them to be there. So I'm going to need to create a bit of a front line myself, wait for reserves to come up whilst my cavalry gets into position. So that's the plan. We've got to cross a river. We will see what happens there. All my cavalry that's here, well, I don't need it all in the centre. I've just got so much that you don't have to use it all. Don't think because you've got the forces, you don't necessarily have to use them. But there's a lot of light cavalry here. I'm going to send some of that to go and help Grouchy to the north, and the rest of it I'm going to sort of keep in a reserve along this ridge. I've identified that as key terrain. And if we zoom in, we can see we've got a bit of a river there. So they're going to have to cross that and they're going to disorder. However, this ground here is all a recess. So I think if I bring my cavalry over here at the right point, they can sort of wait in these hexes, sort themselves out, and then, if needs be, because I don't actually know what the Russians have got over here, that's where I'm expecting their main force, but they could also have something here. But that cavalry eventually, if needed, can come onto this plain, which is quite nice cavalry ground. For the heavies, they got a bit of a march, or they're going to have a bit of a march. They are going to come down this road, all the way down here. And then, you can't really see, but they're going to come down here, come down here. Half of them are going to break off about there. The other half are going to break off somewhere here and somewhere here to fall, hopefully, on what is the Russians' left flank. The reason being, it's the only good cavalry ground I could sort of see. It's all muddy, marshy, lots of rivers and lakes and what have you over here. But this is quite nice cavalry ground. We've got a little bit of area we can sort of hide our troops if we need. There's not many obstructed hexes here apart from this sort of stuff on the east. And depending on what happens with the Russians and what I can manage with the Russians, I'm going to hopefully push them back. So I'm going to have cavalry all along here at position 1, position 2, and then position 3 somewhere there. So if this is rear guard, they're going to have to retreat, and hopefully I'll be able to have my cavalry come in from here, more on the high ground there, from here, and depending on what happens up here, the light cavalry from here, and depending on what happens here, eventually, as maybe more of a reserve, I can bring my other light cavalry there. Set up a defensive line somewhere here. Have a look at what's going on, because it's a bit of a choke point there. I identified it from before, but there's also a choke point there and there and these marshes. That's a lovely place to consider a cavalry charge, because if the troops come over here, they're going to be disrupted. They're going to be blown, and that's your bread and butter for your heavy cavalry. So, gents, maybe ladies, I don't know. Gents, that is the plan, and that's what I'm planning to do. So, I'm just going to have a bit of a tea break, and in the meantime, I'm going to break down my cavalry, the big regiments, into squadrons. I'm going to move them accordingly. It'll be a bit boring for you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause there for a second and be back, probably about 5 minutes, and then give you what I've done. Okay, back. Now, that's the situation. That's what we've got. We can see I was playing with, there's a little button up here. Hotkeys is another thing to learn. They've simplified an awful lot of stuff. And I'm still learning some of the new hotkeys. Not all of them, some of them I just prefer the fantastic new toolbar, which is a universal one. It's really good. This is what we've got then. So, let's start in Krasni itself then. Ney and Murat are going to have their little HQ in a little bit of a protected town hex here. I brought my horse artillery forward. Unfortunately, I did lose a gun on the way because of opportunity fire from this gun. And I'm going to put my artillery, or some of it, well, I've only got 2 batteries at the moment, horse artillery, one on that little raised hex there, and one in that little town when they're ready. And I broke off a skirmish line. And light troops, as I said, can break down, as can guard troops, into as many skirmish companies as you want. Line troops can only do 1. Restricted cannot do any, or cannot break off any companies. Now, skirmishers are one area of contention and confusion, and as I understand, there's quite a big difference with how skirmishers were used in, say, American Civil War as opposed to Napoleonic Wars. Now, this is very broad and general, but skirmishers were pretty much light troops, so invariably armed with rifles, in separate companies, and they would be at the sides of the march order, And their role, essentially, was to safeguard the army, short range, in front of the army, skirmish with other skirmishers, the enemy skirmishers, and what they allow you to do is protect the advance of your main army to give you a chance to adapt to whatever's in front of you. We're not talking hours, we're talking a few turns here. The idea being that an approaching army and their battalions and columns, whatever, they're going to have to deal with the skirmishers first in that hex before they're going to have to or get close to your main army. So these light troops, voltigeurs, flank companies, tirailleurs, whatever, various light troops, would break off on the approach of the army, and we're talking a few hexes, and luckily they fixed it here where you're not allowed to go too far from your parent unit here. They would skirmish with enemy skirmishers, fire, use cover, a very, very loose order formation, and they would basically, like I say, protect your advance and skirmish the other enemy skirmishers. And when you got close enough, they would break off again, come back into formation, and then you were within musket range then anyway. So skirmishers are used for exactly that purpose, for a little bit of an advance. They're not scouts per se, you use light cavalry for that. The time was people used to bloody put skirmishers and you'd find them halfway across the map and what are you doing there? You're miles and miles and miles away. That didn't always happen. There were some occasions, British rifles and stuff like that, where it might have happened. But in general, in game speaking, let's keep it nice and as simple as possible. So I broke off my skirmishers from my light troops and brought them through to the east side of this little town on my side of the river. And of course, the Russians started to appear. So there's a lot of Russian skirmishers. And then we've got that artillery there. There's some unknown units there. And that's pretty much what I did with my skirmishers. My light troops, brought them behind as a bit behind my little sort of village, I'm going to call it, for a bit of protection until I get my more troops coming, which they are coming. Second Brigade's coming, and then who else is coming again? I've forgotten now. My memory is getting terrible, I tell you. Brune, yeah. So Brune's coming with his guys. All right, good. Heavy cavalry, I got them marching. There's not much else to say there. What I did notice, though, and I'm a little bit wary of, was this open ground to the south that I never sort of looked into any more than a cursory glance at the start. Well, we looked at where the heavy cavalry are going. However, all this area to the south, down here, and even further south, there might be hidden units and Cossacks. And there's only a few light units within all the this heavy cavalry. There's one somewhere around there. There's some lancers and some lancers leading the march. So what I've done from that massive cavalry I had in the centre, broke off some light troops from Chateau Cheval. They're going to join the march, and they're not going to go up to the north. They are going to go to the south and have a look at this area and make sure there's no Cossacks around there. The other cavalry here, I'm going to send my Polish lancers to the north to help Grouchy to come down on that right wing of the Russians. Who else am I sending? I was sending another unit. 8th Hussars are going to go up with them. The 7th Hussars are going to stay. And when the infantry push through, they're going to cross over the river and... and then we'll see. Probably they're going to sort of hang back this sort of area up here, possibly behind the town here. But I need them on that side of the river just in case. I'm going to have a reserve of the Prussian Hussars. They're going to stay on this side of the river. They're just there so I thought there might be some Russians in this sort of area south of the town, but there's not. And the rest of the cavalry here, I'm going to call them the Allied units. As I mentioned, they're going to sort of line up here to cross over that river so that they can take advantage of any opportunity that might arise on that side and hold a reserve. So that's about all I've done there. What else I'm going to do is, just as we sort of go, I'm going to mention formations and the various formations you can get, because again they're probably different to other titles in the series and just in warfare in general. And there's a couple of main formations that we need to consider. And if we take these Portuguese troops on the march, on the road, then they are in what we call column form, or column formation. Now, column's very good for a couple of things, and it's kind of a rock, paper, scissors thing with cavalry, artillery, formations, and things like that. Very broad analogy. Column, the benefits are you can get places very quickly, especially on roads, road march. You will get to A to B a lot quicker than you would certainly in square formation or line formation, things like that. And it also packs a bit of a punch, especially for melees, for example, against line troops and against, excuse me, troops in line, I should say. It could be line troops in line. And against squares and things like that, against skirmishes. So you get a big impact for melee, and you get a fantastic or a bonus for marching. The problem arises because you've got a big bunch of guys in one place, and the sides are very vulnerable to things like cavalry. You will invariably get caught short in column if you come up against some well-placed cavalry, for example. It's a juicy target for that cavalry. Another problem, they're a little bit vulnerable to artillery. So that artillery sees a big group, it's a perfect target for them. They're just going to fire into your flanks, mow men down. When the artillery fires, don't forget, it's not just one man going to stop that cannonball. That's going to carry on going through, and swathes of men are going to get cut down. If that artillery gets close enough, it's going to fire grape shot and canister and things. And before you know it, that column's going to break. You're going to have huge casualties, disruption, and they're going to go. So that's your column formation. Very, very good for marching. Very, very good. Well, it is the sort of the default for marching and the default for mass melees, let's say. As we go then, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you each turn on this as well. It might be a little bit of a longer video, but it's not sort of, a Wagram scale battle. So what I'm going to do, Russians appeared, is play it through real time. And a very useful key is the F8 key, Foxtrot 8 key. That will speed up the enemy's turn and combat resolution on their side. That's particularly useful for large-scale battles. And I've seen a couple of comments lately. There you go, French turn already. That's kind of in two ways about that. Either they're static, not moving somewhere, or they haven't got many troops. So we'll see, or maybe a mixture. What was I saying? Yeah, a bit of an off-putting thing people say I've seen in comments is that it takes so long to get through an enemy turn, and press F8. As long as you don't mind not watching sort of the details of what's actually happening hex to hex, unit to unit, and you want to get it done quickly, by all means do it. That's kind of how I play it normally on the bigger battles. I don't want to see every little minutiae, because your commander on the day, if you think about it, wouldn't actually know that. Okay, what are those skirmishers doing? Give me an exact report of what exactly happened during that 15-minute turn. It doesn't quite work like that. So it creates a little bit of a fog of war, and you just have to react with, okay, French turn done, Russian turn done in this case. What am I dealt with? You have to inspect your lines to have a look. That's trying to say a lot of things at once. Right. So, skirmishers disappeared or out of line of sight, so they've probably come back a little bit. However, they look like just line troops, possibly light troops. Line troops, I think. So they've just appeared. We got some line troops up here. Not a lot else, really. Bit of an uneventful turn. So what I'm going to do then is I'm going to move up my artillery to where I wanted it, unlimber it, and because it's horse artillery, remember, I have the ability to fire, or move and fire, on the same turn. So a bit of counter battery fire. It's annoying I lost that gun because I've only got 4 guns. Limbered artillery cannot fire. Forgot to press it. There we go. And they fire back. Oh, no effect. Very good. I'm going to move my cavalry. Now movement, there's a couple of different ways you can move. You can select a stack and you can right click, right click, right click, right click. So double click to select that stack, right click, etc. You could double click a stack, hold the left mouse button and drag it to a hex that you sort of want them to go towards, and you trust the pathfinding and they'll get there. You've got to be a little bit wary of that one, because the pathfinding most of the time is okay, but sometimes it will decide to put you in marshes rather than an adjacent road, etc. one of the improvements Rich is telling me is they're looking into the sort of, I don't know, the coding algorithm, whatever you want to call it, behind pathfinding to try and improve it where possible. And that'll be in the next updates, or the updates that are planned for sort of Easter time. Another way is to hold the Alt button down on a stack. You don't have to select it, and move whatever's in that stack in a sort of a march order. Again, you've got to be very careful with that, because any sort of stack that's touching that stack that you're trying to move, if that makes sense, they will all go. And I'll show you an example when we march that heavy cavalry in the south. So there's various ways, and as you get used to it, you'll be able to realise when you can use each type of movement, when it's hex by hex, whether you can sort of drag and drop and things like that. You just get used to it. But there's more than one way to move. It's not all painstaking, one hex at a time, etc. Speaking of which, we might as well do the heavy cavalry. So, due to the pathfinding and stuff, I could click on these lancers, hold down the Alt key, right-click on a hex down here, and they will probably all march on the road, and because these are adjacent hexes touching, they will all go together with them. For example, I'll do it 2 hexes. We're on the lancers there, and we're going to move them here. And we can see that the whole march order has moved. Individually, I could move these lancers up by holding it down, and then just dropping it on that hex, and then following everybody up. What I prefer to do is just hex by hex, if I'm completely honest. Hold the Alt button down, hex, 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 until I run out of movement points. Again, sometimes it can be infuriating when the pathfinding doesn't quite get it right, and it says, no, you don't want to go on the road or that track and that path. You want to go in the marshes or cross that river. And then I don't like to press an undo button because that's just not realistic. So just be a little bit careful with movement. It does require a little bit of concentration. I still make mistakes sometimes. I think you absolute idiot. But that's part of it. You know, units would make mistakes and things like that in real life, so it's sort of part and parcel. So double-clicking stacks, move them over here. It's all fairly clear hex. I'm going to try and get these on the end of the march. That's why I moved them over there. A very good example here is road march. So hex, 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 until we run out of movement points. Portuguese, I can click that hex here and they will move up towards there as best they can. Supply, the same. And cavalry here, they're not ready to cross the river there. I need to get some cover from this horse artillery, but I will move them forward into a better position. I don't like to overstack. They're quite, I suppose, healthy is a word. Stacking limitations within the engine itself, more than perhaps it should be, but that's another story. But I don't like to overstack, because when things fire, depending on what optional rules you've got, or if you get artillery, it's going to hit all the units in the hex. It'll disrupt potentially all units. It's not a good idea to put cavalry and infantry in the same hex, for example, because you're going to cause disruption, as it would in real life. You haven't got a huge amount of space, and if you've got cavalry trotting through infantry in column, it's just going to be chaotic. And the game engine does quite a nice job, or it does a nice job, of actually simulating that aspect of the warfare. My light cavalry here, that's going to help Grouchy. Those who saw Shako Cheval, you can come up. Polish Lancers, get them on a road if possible. 3, there we go. So yeah, I normally keep 2 squadrons on opportunity fire. I thought that might happen. I normally keep 2 squadrons to a hex. I want to avoid that opportunity fire if possible. We don't want casualties just for the sake of having casualties. Polish Lancers were going up. Was it 8th Hussars we're sending up? Supply, I'm just going to bring off the road a little bit, because I need that road open for my reinforcements to come up. Yeah, it's the 8th Hussars are going to go up with them. 8th Hussars. Division cover, yeah, I thought they might all be the same division anyway. 7th Hussars are going to stay. That horse artillery is going to go up with the rest of the 8th Hussars. Opportunity fire again. And let's have a look. Any more 8th Hussars? Shako Cheval. I was going to send them up as well, I think. Because they're all light, I kind of need more of them up there if I want to have any offensive impact. 8th Hussars, you're going to go up as well. Perfect. Just make sure there's no wasted movement, possibly there. Okay. And my cavalry reserve that I'm going to keep here, my Lancers and the 7th Hussars, I'm going to keep them for, well, if I need them, as a bit of a reserve. So, in the town itself then, I'm going to bring my skirmish line forward to the river. There, here, Murat, join up with Ney. There's your HQ, 646, I haven't broken off from there. And I want to protect those guns as well, really, so I'm going to put a skirmish line up there. And apart from my offensive firing from my artillery, counter battery firing, there's not much apart from moving that I can sort of really want to do. So we'll have a look at what the Russians have got in store for us. Creating a big stack there. Artillery against skirmisher, not always the best. I suppose reinforcements are here. Good. Yeah, so the Russians there, they fire. I mean, we've discussed, or you've seen about the AI and things like that. On the getting started scenarios, it is better. Smaller scenarios, it is better. It will give you more of a challenge. But it's not designed. And in fairness to WDS, they don't claim that they've got an all bells and whistles state-of-the-art AI. You can still have fun with the AI. Yes, it does some crazy things and things, but sometimes you find that, oh, actually, where did that come from? I'm surprised at that. More of a coincidence than anything else, but never mind. I've mentioned numerous times, and everybody will tell you, these games are another beast when you play them multiplayer. Yeah, it's chalk and cheese, no comparison. The AI, good for learning the system. It's something that will shoot at you, something that you can shoot back at, but not much more than that. So, not much. What's in that big stack then? Skirmishers, and some leader. Right. Counter battery fire. Ah, nice. That's quite satisfying. A bit more, and that's about all I can do. Move my... Right, what I'm actually going to do with the cavalry up here. So now they're sort of getting into position, or some of them are getting into position, I need to consider what's up here, what's over here, and potentially what's here. So all of this light cav that I'm bringing over, Polish Lancers and Hussars, Chasseurs Cheval, they're not all going to come down and help Grouchy on this sort of high ground on the Russians' right. They're probably the Chasseurs Cheval are going to go off and do their job, scouting up here, looking for Cossacks, looking for any more Russians, etc. So I'm not going to have massed cavalry here, or not every cavalry unit that I'm bringing over. So the Hussars will come down. Let me just keep them out of sight, perhaps. Chasseurs Cheval, you're going to come up here and scout. I think sometimes you don't pay attention and you move a unit without wanting to move them. That's exactly what's happened there. So I'll put them back there. Now we've got our Polish Lancers. They're all going to come up. The Polish Lancers are going to help the Hussars on that side. And they've got some horse artillery they're going to bring up as well. It's nice to have a lot of cavalry. If you don't know what you're doing with them, it can sometimes be infuriating. Because people tend to think, like I mentioned before, they are the panzers of the battlefield. They were not. Not generally speaking anyway. Opportunity fire, never mind. My force preservation, if I did hex to hex movement and things, it would probably be better, but this video would be very, very long. Now, Portuguese troops, you're going to come up. And you're going to come up here. And what am I going to do? I'm going to bring my skirmish line onto their side of the river, because then they're going to have to start dealing with that skirmish line as well. It gives me a bit of a chance to marshal. See, this is what I mean with skirmishers. They have to deal with them now, which gives me a bit more freedom to sort of bring my line troops forward, perhaps into a position, a jump-off position. But any sort of... what have we got there? Yeah, sorry, they're going to have to deal with that skirmish line, and it gives me an opportunity to then react to what they do with that skirmish line, etc. Yeah, we'll bring them forward. That would be useless if I attack there, and bring my line troops forward. Yeah, so, bit of a jump off position. So, next turn, or maybe the turn after, depending on how we go, I think I've got enough force there to make a foray, let's say, into the town. I've just noticed skirmishers there. I haven't noticed any other units apart from that artillery. So, on my leger, my light troops that I have there, they, apart from the Portuguese, bad example, they're disordered because they went into the town, but they'll sort themselves out. What was I saying? So yeah, they're B rated. Yeah, the quality of those troops is quite good. They've got good leaders, so I should be all right. Portuguese troops, I don't want to say they're cannon fodder. They might be good for something, but I'm not going to rely on them too much for any critical operations. I can move my reinforcements up as well as their supply. We know if we go up here, we've got Bruni has arrived, and that's quite a simple march order on that hex. We have our cavalry train, I'm going to call it. You'll probably be able to get on the road and in the march. Perfect. My light cavalry, it's not the time to send them. However, I am going to set up a horse battery here just in case something pops up over the hill. And I think I can't really do much else this turn. So over to the Russians then, see what they do. I have to say, those unit graphics, the artwork, next level. Really is nice. Thanks, Rich. So, they're skirmishing with my skirmishers. They're firing some grape shot and canister, I should say, into my skirmisher, which they stayed. Good, because they're a decent quality unit. Yes, they're disrupted, but they're in command range and they're B quality, so I expected them to. You know, they shouldn't be running away with what they are. Okay, that battery needs to go. Even if you don't take a gun, that's not the end of the world. You're still creating fatigue, and fatigue is going to give any unit. It doesn't mean they're getting tired. It just means the constant firing on them, keeping their heads down, ducking. That's going to wear down, increase their fatigue, and that combat unit doesn't have to be artillery, whatever it is. The fatigue value, and you can see more in the manual, will have a negative effect, as it would with any unit in any war. Okay, so that's what that fatigue's doing. It's simulating you constantly, or the constant sort of firing upon them, I suppose, for want of a better word. Right, the hussars. Let's have a look. Now, when I get to places like this, I do creep forward, hex by hex, because I don't always know what's around. There we go, for example. Okay, so I've just come across Russian dragoons. Now, that's one thing, personally, playing against AI. That's a big old regiment, and I've got my little squadrons. However, I do have advantage because I can attack from multiple hexes, etc. But the enemy, the AI, is certainly not going to break down into squadrons unless it's done from the start. So I know that they're there. I've got not. I hold the upper hand. I have the better ground. However, there is a bit of a ditch, a crevice there. Okay, fair enough. Hussars against dragoons, eh? Right, Chasseur Cheval on their scouting mission. I'm going to break them up. Now, those that may have seen before on the optional rules, no detached melee, for example, fantastic idea, but it's a little bit limiting sometimes when you've got scouts and their ability to defend themselves if needs be, for example. No detached melee, sometimes you can, and they just either would give up or not, or have to run away, whereas sometimes they would turn and fight. That's just what was done. So that's why, generally speaking, a bit more so than that, we don't play with the no detached melee. So send my scouts here. I need to go down here. I'm going to just split them up I'm not going to use them to go and attack anything anyway. However, if I meet some Cossacks, I might have to defend them. And then we've got my Polish Lancers. You're definitely going to come up and down here. Possibly think about attacking those Russian Dragoons with my Lancers, especially if I can get a good position on them. 8th Hussars. I think that was all the cavalry I was moving up there. In terms of infantry movement in the town then, well, I'm going to bring my skirmishers forward a little bit into the outskirts. No effects. Alright, and I'm also going to bring my troops. The problem is they're disrupted. I'm going to bring them over the river anyway. They will be able to sort themselves out. Bring your brigade commander as well. Opportunity fire. And Portuguese, stay where you are. Why not? A little bit of fatigue. And you can cross over the river as well. Oh, you didn't fatigue. Wow. You did now. Yeah, sorry, you didn't disorder. So you did now. However, I'm on the flank of that gun. It is uphill. There's only one gun. They must have reasonably high fatigue. There's a leader present. I wonder what the algorithm will say. Good. Advantage attacker. Sort that melee out. And we take that gun, but reveal a lot of skirmishers. Okay, fair enough. Skirmishers, we don't know what's there. Still got line troops. Got those dragoons to sort out. Okay, fair enough. I shall bring probably 2nd Brigade, more or less, straight into it. We can bring those Portuguese troops up now that we've dealt with. Now we've dealt with that gun, for sure. My reserves are going to come up pretty much straight in. Or 2nd Brigade are going to be straight in anyway. And I'll still have a reserve because Bruni is somewhere down here. And I've still got him as a reserve. So, yeah, not too bad, not too bad. Let's have a look here. We've got a march there to here. So the first group are going to break off a couple of turns probably. The first lot of what I'm planning, they're going to break off there. Possibly 2nd group there and so forth. So they've got a couple of turns of marching anyway on the road. So we'll bring them down, cross the river. So you've got to be very careful auto moving in places like that because it's very easy to accidentally send a unit into a town hex. It disrupts and you've then got to change your order of march because that disrupted unit won't have the same movement points as everybody else. You've got to sort of bring them out, sort them out and then join the march somewhere else. On a large campaign, that can be chaotic because not to disrupt the march, it could take a couple of turns, they slot in somewhere, you get to your staging area and they are sort of, 20 hexes away, then you've got to bring them back down to join their parent unit, etc. That horse artillery can set up just in case this side of the river. Doesn't look to be anything here. I mean, what's my line of sight over here? Well, it's not too bad. There's nothing on the crest anyway, or behind. Possibly clear. However, I don't know what's in the southwest of that town yet, of Krasni. So until I sort of push forward a little bit more, low ammo. So we will bring supplies up. Yeah, so I don't know what's actually down here yet. So I don't want them to get a nasty shock, and it's going to take them a turn or two, remember, to sort themselves out when they cross that river. So I think this turn is done. What have the Russians got? They have an inkling to go towards Moscow by the look of it. Well, if it's a rear guard, there's probably a delay in action anyway. So, and the scenario header did say push them out as quick as possible. I'm a little bit more careful with that, a bit more, believe it or not, methodical, despite what you might have seen so far. And sometimes you come across a game with very rigid. I think Campaign Austerlitz, there's a campaign in there where you've got dragoons and you've got to take an Austrian position, and I've tried that about 3 times and I can't win it. I've come close by just basically throwing everything as quick as I can, but then I don't really enjoy that. I never play for victory points and stuff anyway. It's all about the journey for me and moving things around and It's equivalent of moving toy soldiers around on your carpet floor to me, but just the modern version of it. So I just play for the experience. Winning, yay, that's good. That's nice. However, it's much more about the journey for me. All right, so we've got some disordered units that sort themselves out. Those skirmishers are resupplied. Happy days. Ooh, they are a tempting target, those dragoons. However, hussars from the high ground. How far away are the next lot? No, I think I'm going to get my lancers down before I sort of think about it. And ideally send in lancers rather than hussars, but I'll get 3 squadrons down this turn. What else? Certainly not to get in any sort of decent position, I would say. We'll try. Maybe a turn or two. Depends what they do as well. But we'll march everybody up here. Chasseur Cheval, you're going to be up there. Tail end hussars, perfect. Right, in the town. Move my skirmishers through, hex by hex by hex, to try and see, is there anything else around? Doesn't look to be so far. Okay, so they're all in a big bunch over here. Okay, right. This is going to take careful planning, this one. Okay, so Portuguese troops are disordered. I'm going to keep you as a bit of a reserve so they can cross the river and just sort of meander about. We do have some fresh troops here, good. Move on the road. I dare say. Okay, so what have I got? I've got a leader. B quality, not much fatigue. Against 2 units of light skirmishers. Advantage defender, eh? I wonder if I were to put my skirmishers in there as well. Would it change? No, prediction 50-50, let's say. 29 attacker, 4 defender. Good God. Skirmishers are war elephants, for want of a better word. They are just can be immovable objects. You need overwhelming force to sort of get past them sometimes. Not to worry, not to worry. You're disordered. You are going to be disordered there. Never mind. You will sort yourself out. Right, bring my reserves in straight off from the off. Portuguese troops across the river there. I suppose I could actually bring some guns up as well, which I'm going to do. Make that here. Bit of a mess crossing, but that's what happens with choke points sometimes. Horse artillery is going to be absolutely fine where it is. Remaining supply. Rooney. And some forgotten supply. And then we get down here. Hex by hex. I hope I do get the opportunity at 18 turns. Hopefully I'm going to get an opportunity to put in a nice cavalry charge somewhere. On the actual battle, more at 30, 40 cavalry charges, not always that successful. Not always that successful, but let's see if we can change that. It'll take timing and planning, but that's part of the fun. Go there. Clear hex. What have we got? A little village, some marshes. It'd be nice to have a look just over that side. Is there anything over there? Over here, I will send some cavalry down this side as well, because that's quite an opportunity. If the Russians fall on them from here. It's quite good cavalry ground, not bad at all. And again, these are quite nice short, sharp turns, which is quite nice. I always feel like I'm missing something. And I probably am, and people will say, "Oh, you haven't done this, you haven't done that." But I think, because we've got a plan and we have to try and stick to that plan if possible, we're okay. Russians will probably mess it up, but who knows? a lot of choke points. So just looking at their line of retreat there's a lot of choke points. Got one bridge there and marshes, a bridge there, or they have to go south. They could cross the river, that would disorder them. The cavalry, I'm hoping, are going to have a field day. That would be nice. That's the plan anyway. So, in the town, those skirmishers just all bunching up. We're going to have to deal with them stack by stack. No problem. What I'm not concerned about, or what I want to know is, what's down here? Nothing, by the looks. Not on my side anyway. And there's something there. Right. That wasn't too bad. And you're going to push forward. Some supply, more skirmishers. Yeah, so there's a few Russians around. What I need to do is start breaking through and dislodging these skirmishers. So you are... There's some fresh troops on the road. 644B, and you're against 300 skirmishers. Probably not going to go my way. Advantage attacker. Okay, fair enough. Leaders there, I suppose. Essart, what can your boys do? 46 attacker, 29 defender. Oh yeah, I gave them a bit of advantage tonight on the slider. That's no problem. And what else? Optional rules. We play without the optional fire and melee results, just because that can give you either result of a dice. It could give you a high roll or a low roll, meaning that sometimes you get quite a surprising result. Feats of superhuman strength, let's say, when skirmishers manage to beat off a column or whatever, and then sometimes you have a situation you think you have to win, but your lead is really inept, and the dice says, no, you're not having that one. Rather than an average, when you have it switched on, it's kind of an average of the dice, so you pretty much know what you're going to get each time. I like the unknown, when it's like, oh, wow, that shouldn't have happened, or, oh, dear, that shouldn't have happened either. Right, so... They are meleeed. They're disordered. Yeah, advantage attacker. I need to start getting rid of them and push them back. 3 attacker, 5 defender. Push them back. They're not really going to go anywhere. Skirmish line forward. Light troops. I don't play with multiple infantry melee, but we do play with multiple cavalry melee. Portuguese troops. You can just sort of stay out of the way in a nice quiet corner. And then my reserves coming out. And the artillery, so let's... What use? Yeah, okay. I won't be able to melee because they already have, or they have, and they're going to ruin that stack for us, no problem. Yes, they're disrupted, but column, if you think about it, going through a town is going to get disrupted. The roads, the streets are narrow. We had that big column that we looked at before. And disruption is a good thing. It's a realistic thing. Line troops come up here. Artillery. You can come here. I'll bring line troops there. And we better bring some supply up as well. The supply. Now, this is what I was saying about your order of march and things before. The supply don't have as many movement points as other units, and perhaps they should have a few more, but it's an easy PDT fix. Because my reserves and replacements, reinforcements, they're going to have a potential problem if it was a big march, for example. You'd have to pull the supply off the road, potentially, put them on another road, potentially, and let somebody through. But that's part and parcel of the game and of warfare. Right. Those dragoons decided not to move. They're facing the other way. I've got a lot of cavalry for a charge. Move these guys out of the way. Polish lancers. Yep, I'm going to do it. It'd be a boring video without it. Carpe diem and everything. So, I've got a leader. Polish, they're going to go down there. Advantage defender, that's to be expected. This is what I was saying about splitting them into squadrons. If I had just kept all my my Uhlans in one hex as a big regiment, I'd only be able to attack them once. Yes, there'd be more force, but I like to think that multi-hex attacks give you a bit of an advantage. See, we're down to no prediction. I wonder if these guys will give me the advantage. They do indeed. Lancers, good against cavalry. 60 attacker, 28 defender. Some advantage, but that's the dice roll. Oh well. Oops. However, you do have reinforcement, gents. And follow you up. The next turn. Hussars. Yeah, you can come down here. Chasseur Cheval. You're going to hold fire somewhere here, because you might be needed down here, you might be needed elsewhere. Bring some artillery up. Chasseur Cheval. And some hussars that are lagging behind. You can come down here as well. We were saying to scout over here. Looks pretty clear. Yep. What have we got here? Push forward, scout that side. Good. Looks pretty clear. And bring you up here. I thought, yeah. And then what's over here? So it's looking pretty clear on the north, which is nice. We don't have to divert anybody. Those Chasseurs Cheval there, I'm having them as a sort of reserve to react to anything just in case. Cavalry cross. Yes, I think so. Those skirmishers pushed a path out. There doesn't seem to be anything down here to the south. These guys can see over here. Nothing really behind that crest. Yeah, I'm going to start bringing this cavalry over. Now, naturally, sending 400 hussars over a river crossing, I personally believe that that will cause a little bit of disruption. It's going to take them a bit of time. Yeah, without going into too much detail really and discussing it to the nth degree, it will cause, in my opinion, disruption, and it should. So I'm going to bring them all over, if I can. Prussian hussars, I'm going to leave there as my sort of reserve, and eventually I'm going to bring the 7th up and some lancers to when it's a bit clearer in the town, basically. Prussian Uhlans, you're going to come as well. We will also march our troops. That's all they can get. They can start breaking off, I think. Let's have a look. Yes, they can. So the next turn, half of my heavy cavalry can start to break off on that little road here. Or, sorry, road. Break off the road and come up to a staging area. Let's have a look in a bit more detail for that cavalry ground. I thought it was quite good as I remember. Yeah, it is. Look at that. Nice plain. We can hide some troops here if needs be. It's a nice run in. If we're careful, we can avoid any disruption and fall on that Russian left flank. Time it right with the infantry coming in to push them out, and on the north side, it's all coming together quite nicely. That lonely supply wagon, get that sorted. And what will the Ruskies do? They got some. Oh, we managed to get some of them out. Some of them are routed. And they're on the move. So, what are they up to? Ah, the Dragoons have gone as well, is it? Yes, good. Lancers, particularly Polish Lancers. One of the 10 disordered. Nice. Polish Lancers, especially Polish Lancers of the Guard, Imperial Guard, one of my favourite units. And they're A-rated. Well done, boys, well done. With that in mind, we might as well stay here. This is quite a nice area, this high ground, to overlook what they have, or the Russians have here, and anybody sort of coming out, as we said, between that choke point here and the choke point there. Nice cavalry ground. So you are disordered, but never mind. You are not disordered, we shouldn't be. There we go. Nice eyes on what they've got. Not a lot, not as much as I thought. Or they're hidden somewhere. Bringing some artillery up as well. Now, Hussars. Hussars, I'm going to bring the 6th up with the Lancers. And the 8th are going to cover this sort of, I don't want to call it a ravine, I guess, but this sort of lip here. They're going to cover that area there. And the rest of you are going to join back up. Chasseur Cheval, I'm going to come here. We're going to have a look what's down here. You're going to come over. They're going to get disrupted. We'll put them there. See if we can't see what's on the other side of the river. Looks okay. On that high ground, that looks nice and clear. Right here. Nice and clear. Now, this is probably overkill, to be honest. Just thinking about the scenario and everything, it's probably overkill. However, it's, in my opinion, showing good practice, because if you didn't do it, that's when you get bit in the arse when those Cossacks find you out and you have to deal with them. So, heavy cavalry, they're going to break off up until probably Nansuti's wing. It's about half, yeah. Don't forget, a lot of that is light cav that I'm going to go with them as well. So, Nansuti's wing are going to carry on. Meanwhile, Montbrun's cavalry are going to head up, as we said, to the south of the village, the town. What's happened with my cavalry here? Well, some of them are okay, some of them are not. However, because that ground is sloping, it gives them an opportunity to sort of hide away until everybody is back and ready. Disrupt, no problem. Just sort of stay out of sight of any Russians. Bring them over, bring them over. Good. In the town itself, then, that big stack in the middle, but they're all disordered. I've got a lot of troops that are probably disordered as well, and I think I'm just going to go straight in, to be honest. With the bayonet. 32 attacker, 56 defender. Yeah, we'll take that one. Light troops on the 1st Brigade. You're also 1st Brigade. SR, you did well last time. Advantage attacker. Do you know what? I'm going to put them all in. I'm going to put everybody in that stack in. That's better. 49 attacker, 142 defender. Oof. That's what I mean about the dice rolls. Sometimes it goes with you, sometimes it goes against. I didn't expect it to be quite that good, sort of 3 to 1, but yeah, I'll certainly take it. And hopefully that's pushed that stack pretty much out. It's a big old stack now, but it's pushed them pretty much out of the town. Bring you up. You can stay where you are. Portuguese are happy where they are. I will bring my artillery over. Got to be careful with that artillery. Okay. What's there? See, this is quite a nice area because it's high ground. The town here is built up, and the area, sort of the suburbs, let's say, are lower ground. And we can see that on the elevation hex in the top left there. So, that's not a bad place for some artillery. And I can unlimber it, the beauty of horse artillery, and I suppose to start firing on those troops in column on the other side. We've got some troops in column here, potentially. No, I think we'll leave that one. Although, right, what do I want to do here? No, I'm not going to bring that stack because then that would be 2 stacks committed and leave that artillery sort of on its own if we're not careful. Bring that supply off the road to allow Bruni to come up. Move them away from that road hex so they're not adjacent when you're marching. Otherwise, if I'd left that cavalry there, when I quick move Bruni, they would get in the march as well, causing disruption and things that you don't necessarily want. So we'll leave that there. Have melee. Yeah, so it's looking good so far. Cavalry have moved. keep forgetting that supply. Boys in the north are happy. Let's see what the Russians have. So it looks like they're feeding forces in. Bit of a counter-attack maybe? Certainly looks like it. The Dragoons have set themselves up to be charged from behind again. Bit of a weird place to have a supply wagon, but that's the AI. Alright, so I was just thinking, with time-wise, this video might break it into 2 parts. So I might do this turn and then come back to it again. But I'm going to carry on playing. I'll just literally press stop record and then press record again, but we'll see. Okay, so pretty much pushed them out of the town now. I think that's where I'll start, in here. Let's get rid of some of these skirmishers. So, would I have an advantage with 1 stack? Yes. What did the dice say? 8, 4. Yeah, that's good. What I wanted was just to get that line. I don't want anybody in the city. It's my town now, and you can leave. 2 column. Yeah, we'll have a go. That's it. Good. So I can give myself a bit of space now. To get the rest of my artillery up. Where do I want to put that? It's not a bad place for artillery there, to be honest. What can you see? Oh, block line of sight by units. Oh no, they're in the town hex. That's a nice town hex there actually for that artillery. If I can get it up there. Not quite this turn. Never mind. Supply. Come up with the Portuguese. Murat. Get your ass in gear. That supply can go on that road, a nice adjacent road. And you come down, and let's bring Bruni in. My cavalry is in various states of disorderment, but they will be slowly sorting themselves out. And I'll pretty much leave them in position until, maybe get them up to slightly higher ground, until they're all pretty much ready to move off. I don't want to chance it and have my cavalry piecemeal. Much better used en masse. Probably move that artillery up now. I don't think there's anything there, so move up the artillery. Probably a little bit far for Polish lancers to charge the dragoons again. Yeah, I'd say it's a little bit too far. So I will move them here. Just in case the next time I can. So with cavalry charges en masse, similar to what we're sort of doing now and discussing, facings are important, because if you want to charge, essentially you can't touch a stack, and that's the first thing you have to do is press the charge button. If you start moving, if you start turning your cavalry to face another direction, unfortunately you can't charge. They need all their movement points to create that charge. That's why, although it might look nice to have everything all pretty in a line facing the same direction, I have to sort of face my cavalry here and face my cavalry here this turn in preparation. That's assuming he stays there. This turn, and sort of preempt what's going to happen so that I can use all or as much of my cavalry as I can for a charge. So it does take a little bit of planning. Lancers, supplies. I think these lancers are going to go after the supply. Yeah. Yep, that's exactly what I'm going to do. These lancers, hussars, you're happy where you are. Come over here. Horse artillery, 8 hussars, 8 hussars. So we're getting slowly into quite a nice position with quite a lot of cavalry on their right wing, on their northern flank. The Chateau Cheval, I said, are going to come down here. And the scouts, I'll pretty much leave them out, I think. They had a good line of sight, as I remember. That's not too bad. It'd be nice to know what's there. They're going to get disrupted if they go. They'd have to come all the way back here. You've got an eye on it there. You've got a nice eye on things there. And you've got quite a nice eye on things here. So yeah, I'm going to leave them where they are. Over here, Lancers are going to push forward. Make sure there's nothing. Oh, it's quite a nice line of sight. Nothing, doesn't seem to be anything there. And what I'm going to do to separate this order of march is bring this horse artillery to create a gap in my march order. This means then when I quick march these troops in this line, the corresponding one or the following ones, non-city guys, they're not going to follow because there isn't that connection there. If that horse artillery was there, then everybody would start to head north. So I've separated the troops that I want now. There we go. Oh, not that it's going to make a difference, but I will leave that 1 hex gap that I tried to achieve there. Anything else? That supply again. They're going to hate me. Just always forgetting about them. So I think, yeah, we'll split this video into 2 parts. I don't want to bore everybody with hours of drivel. So just the situation then, I've got scouts, chasseurs cheval up in the north. I've protected my flank. That was my plan all along. We've got quite a nice amount of light cavalry falling on the Russians' right flank. That was in the plan. We've got some cavalry as well because we've identified sort of a nice choke point there. It's quite limited, so we don't want to send too many cavalry to this sort of area here. Otherwise, it'll be a cluster mess. We have taken the town. We've taken krasni. They've taken Krasni, and there's a bit of fighting in the sort of the northeast of the town. Interested to see what's going on here with the Russians because they're sending columns in rather than retreating. That light cavalry has a nice line of sight, on some dragoons if they stay there, as well as the Russian supply. So they've got to be careful. Reinforcements are coming up, including some artillery. Got a nice cavalry reserve here. When it's all clear in the town, they will go through the town. And we've sent over quite a bit of light cavalry, lancers, my sort of allied regiments. They're going to sort themselves out before descending on this bit. I mean, to be honest, they might have to then cross this river and follow up, but that's no problem. And then my heavy cavalry finally have got into a position where they can split off. My cuirassier and everything, and my cuirassier and Montbrun, they're going to head north to that nice cavalry ground there, whilst the rest of them follow or carry on southeast, and then up this area here. So it's all coming together. Thank you very much for watching. Make sure you put some comments down if you like the video, subscribe and all this, that, and the other. If you have any questions about anything that we sort of covered or haven't covered yet, it might be a video or 2 for a start. And I hope you've enjoyed it. Part 2, look out for it. Otherwise, happy gaming and see you in Krasni in part 2.